for joining me, and it's back over to the studio.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Fantastic interview, and also your hair is looking lovely today. Welcome back to EWC Central. I am Quickshot, and I'm joined on the sofa by Initialize, as I have been most of the weekend, but we have a very special guest. It's the head coach for Fnatic's TFT squad, Frodan. Just quickly before we dive into conversations, could you introduce yourself and tell some of the viewers where you're from and what your esports credentials are?
Sure. So my name is Frodan. I am the head coach for Fnatic TFT. I used to be a commentator and caster for other games as well, like StarCraft, League of Legends, and Hearthstone is probably where people most know me from.
That's where I know you from.
But these days, I do mainly TFT, co-streaming, and analysis, and content creation. Fnatic also wanted to have me as a coach. It's something I haven't done for the first time, so it's a really interesting challenge to do it because no one's ever really coached TFT, so I really welcome the challenge and try to embrace it. It didn't work out this weekend, but I'm really proud of the guys.
I'm very happy to hear you say that, and I think as far as the game library goes, you have some notable, impressive ones in there. At the end of this interview, I want to discuss a little bit like the format and what coaching was like, but I think immediately, we didn't get to catch much of the Vitality series on our broadcast. How did that play out? What was your sort of professional take on it?
I'm pretty depressed because I think that it was very winnable for Vitality. I think that the Wolves came out really prepared, and they also got the good openers, but every single game, despite the fact that Vitality was on the back foot, they made good plays. I do think they made a couple of crucial errors in game one in particular. I think they took a line trying to play around Galio when Galio is one of the most contested units, and that was a risk. And it looked like it was going to pay off, but then ultimately I think Wolves had really good teamwork to punish Setsuko, who is their star player, and ultimately that was one of the big key factors. Vitality also, again, they kept trying to make the shot clock buzzer beater come back from behind victory, and they were very close, but it just came up a little bit short. And I'm really sad because those guys worked super hard. They slept only 4 hours a day when the set launched to try to grind every game they possibly could, and it just feels bad because they were undefeated leading up to the series.
Just quickly for us, for all the esports viewers, shot clock buzzer beater is a basketball reference.
And I was about to say as well, because one of the things we've been sort of talking about is how you find those kind of comeback angles, especially if you don't hit the Syndras you're looking for, whatever else it is. What are the angles you've been seeing that have generally worked across the tournament? Because you've been covering it pretty heavily as a co-streamer, as well as obviously the coach. You've put a lot of time into this set.
There's two elements about the meta that I think that people aren't really paying that close attention to because it's such a new format. The first is that you do need to readjust your expectation to what a successful game is in TFT. By the way that Riot defines teamfight tactics, if you top 4, that's a good game. If you bot 4, it's a bad game. But in reality, there's actually good 7th places or even good 8th places, depending on what your role is on the team. You have to have somebody in this specific meta that's dedicated to a composition like Kog'Maw that is trying to play for units and actively disrupt the enemy team. You're like you're a dedicated backmarker, you're the griefer. If you play like racing games, you understand that like somebody has to go second to last and send the other person last. So that's one thing. And the second thing also is team chemistry matters so much because there's a lot of teams that came in with strong individual players, and we thought that maybe that credentials and that history alone could make up for the lack of teamwork. But in reality, Wolves is the least impressive Chinese team on paper, but if you ask every Chinese player outside of Wolves, they picked Wolves to be their best #1 team because their teamwork has been excellent ever since the qualifiers, and everyone looked at them and said, we need to find a way to replicate that, but they couldn't do it.
I mean, I think fundamentally, you've just summarized days of content on our broadcast. We have Street Fighter 6, Fortnite, TFT, we tell her a lot, and we're trying to like siphon, filter, summarize a lot of things. I had very strong feelings about how individual accomplishments may actually be a bit of a blocker. At the risk of being quite on the nose, how was the Fnatic run at the tournament? How do you reflect? I'm not trying to be mean about it, but I think there was a lot of hopes and expectations. I think as well from people who maybe were less familiar with TFT, you see the names, you see the accomplishments, and you go, this is them going to be doing well. This may be painful to watch, but give us a summary on how the tournament went from your perspective.
Yeah, so from our perspective, our roster was really stacked. Our scrim results were some of the best across all the field. You know, one of the things about when you scrim other teams is you kind of indirectly ask how are they going for you. I think we had the best or second best results going into it. And so I think that our confidence rode really high, but that ended up sabotaging a little bit because the meta shifted as we were traveling to the event. And so we were confident and we didn't want to scrim nearly as much being here. and the meta was shifting away from us. And so that ended up being something that worked against us. The second element was that I think that our group was actually the group of death because we had such a well-rounded group that there were no weaklings, while there were alleged weaklings in other groups.
I get what you mean, yeah.
And so some of the best scrim partners for other teams like T1 was actually one of the teams that people were copying strats from. Once again, T1 comes in really prepared. Their teamwork is excellent, even if they lag a little bit of star power on paper. They ended up being a valuable practice partner for so many other teams, but we couldn't scrim them because they weren't in our group. And so there's like a little bit of like, small things adding up. And then the last thing was, I think we trusted maybe on our individual skill a little too much. Dish Soap, Moala, Weijin are three of the top best players in the entire world. Kiyun ended up being our best player, and he ended up being like a huge backbone and IGL captain. But I think in the end, we needed to come together more and say, hey, look, other teams are making it work, even though they're not as individually skilled.
And I'm really glad you brought up that meta shifting, because we got to chat a little bit before we came on, and you say, look, if it'd been 2 days later or 2 days earlier, it would have felt very different. So I guess, what was the meta shift, if you're allowed to say at this point?
The meta shift was that we knew that Syndra was really good, but part of us was trusting that we could have actually found alternative ways to play out of Syndra, and also that we weren't nearly as hard committal to it. We wanted to say, hey, we can find ways to beat it. And teamfight tactics is oftentimes a self-correcting game where if something is too good, something else will rise up to beat it. Unfortunately, we happen to be in quite a degenerate meta. It actually, a lot of people are saying that this is one of the most degen metas we've had in years, and so we sort of failed to recognize that and build a game plan around it. It's not that it's actually a bad meta for 4v4. It's actually quite a good meta for 4v4, all things considering. It's just that we didn't recognize that, and so we should have leaned more into everyone has to have that dedicated Syndra player, but we were like, maybe we will, maybe we won't, and I think that cost us one valuable game in particular, which would have changed the outcourse of everything.
It's actually so brutal because it is a tough schedule. You don't have a lot of wiggle room for losses. I do want to just steal your brain power for a tiny bit. We can actually jump into that live game, Twisted Minds versus T1. And one of the things I want to explain for maybe the non-TFT viewers, the discussion that Frodan was just bringing up around having different options. You have to be able to think of like rock, paper, scissors. There's always a weapon that can defeat it. But in TFT, it's rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, lightsaber, whip, everything, right? There's so many other things that you need to balance in, but there is always going to be a tool, right? Which makes it hard. So that's kind of a summary. We'll unpack that later on in our show. What I will ask you, Frodan, when we look at this, TM versus T1, who's going to be winning? Who's your favorite? Come on.
I got to go with T1. There's a reason why everyone's picking up their strats, even though they were a team that was underestimated because they only have one world championship caliber player, at least on paper. And they have a bunch of people who were good at other things, right? SCSC is a former pro gamer in other games, and Dooney Zuni is much more of an influencer, but I think Bintum's leadership really brought everyone together, and there's a reason why people call him the KR GOAT.
And I guess with that in mind, because I've had a conversation with, say, Till from Toronto Ultra, a few of these other teams who are saying, look, actually, when we were building teams, we wanted to get players with team play experience who maybe weren't TFT players originally. How much value have you seen from other teams in terms of getting those experienced players from other titles into this format?
Immensely, immensely. I think communication is something that TFT players aren't often used to doing unless you are a streamer where you complain about the game.
But even then, the communication that you're doing to your audience or to your viewer base is not how many units do we have, how we play, am I playing you, am I going to grief my team, how do we manage the board, who's farming futures, like the amount of information that you need to be sharing. I have been around the esports industry for a long time. I cannot think of a single other title that has this amount of intense communication on a 1-minute timer.
Yeah, I mean, less than that if you think about it, because you need time to actually play your turn. So if you talk for the entire 30 seconds, you're not actually playing your turn. And you have to use that valuable time to also discern information, not just about your spot, but your teammate's spot and your opponent's spot. A lot of people think 4v4 is actually too hard. They think that it's one of those things where...
I'm not surprised at all.
They would rather dedicate it as their main format because it's so many different soft skills and these things that are completely under-discovered and under-explored that they feel like it's just so different from 1v1. And the game meta shifts as well because compositions are completely differently evaluated.
For sure.
Augments are completely different evaluated. And then the extra kicker is that it's almost like you are put into flex queue for TFT. Like everyone has to play jungle, mid, and bottom and support and some kind of role.
Depending on what you
depending on what your opener is. And so it's you add that extra element. You have to learn every comp. You have to learn how to work with everybody. You have to communicate. You have to also play all these different spots. It's a complete headache, but the players love it. They've never engaged with TFT quite like this before.
So I guess I've got two questions. I'll start with the first one. You were mentioning some of the soft skills that are really undervalued. Have you got one in particular you go, that is the skill that TFT players are really lacking right now?
Hold on, not so lacking. Maybe say in this format.
Yes, that's fair way.
In this format, the hardest thing to do is to get out of the way, even if you think you have a really good spot.
Oh,
because
that's
there's a lot of people who
amazing.
look at this and say, hey, look, I have a Pandora's items. I could probably play Syndra. But if their teammate has an even better start for Syndra, you have to think about, one, discuss that and say, can you both play it? And if not, what is the thing that you have to do? Because it's all about your relative power to the other team and your team. So getting out of the way is one of the hardest skills.
Can I tell you, I truly wish more people understood the impact of that sentence you just said. I know very little about how you've approached coaching. Just that summary alone, I have the utmost confidence in you. I think you've done a great job. Because I also think, just for when on air, I was discussing how I had a very strong opinion that if you have a strong-willed, individual experienced player, it's way harder.
The ego, yeah.
In theory, I wouldn't say ego.
Well,
it's way harder in theory to get that person to bend or adjust their play style for this format. You
100%.
win tournaments by not playing nice with others and not giving up your board.
To that point, I think that's what something like Team Vitality and T1 do very well, and even Wolves. It feels like there's no dedicated roles, and some teams came in here with more like slanted roles, like I'm leaning towards this way. You have to be unbiased, no ego, you have to be very open-minded, open communication. Even some of the players who are most notably known for being egotistic, like Setsuko, who's like the #1 ranked NA player. A lot of people consider him to be overconfident, egotistic, call everyone bad. He's actually the biggest team player on Team Vitality because he gets out of the way.
Correct. And that's the thing is, depending on the board state, depending on what you roll, you may be the fill player or the farming player, the sacrificial player, whatever the words are. If you get the best board state and the best rolls early, you are now the star for that round, right?
That's entirely correct.
What we did see as well is like we don't get to watch too many of the live games. I actually want to ask you a prediction on this specific game in a second. So try to look at the board state if you can. But one of the best
I'll try. My eyesight's getting worse.
We'll got a full screen for you in a moment. But like we saw the Toronto Ultra versus Na'Vi series, and Na'Vi ended up losing game 2. No, Toronto Ultra lost game 2. Na'Vi bounced back to win game 3, and I think they were not favored to do so, if I recall correctly. But the point was, the fact that they had 3 of their team members out early gave them several extra minutes to talk, to strategize, to prep for game 3, and it looked like they came back and smashed. Now, regardless, once we do get to see the traits and sort of the HP pools, can you give us a informed coach's prediction on who will win this round?
I usually have to watch for a few minutes because I have to see all the players.
Don't give me excuses. I'm asking you.
I will say that in a silver start lobby, that usually means that you're kind of at baseline tempo, which is the lowest and slowest start, which means that you don't necessarily you're not as pressured to make a play, so you can actually take time to be a little bit slower. And there's one particular augment that people took, which is Caretaker's Ally, which basically sets the pace for the rest of the team. And that person looked like they had an early Nila 2. So whichever team that had that Nila 2, they had the most HP that they'll be able to preserve starting from stage 3 and stage 4, because stage 3 is the most crucial phase of that game to preserve HP. I think that team right now is in the driver's seat. So
final question of the game before we move on.
Okay, so at this point, you have explored TFT from so many angles. A coach, a player, a streamer, broadcaster, looking
Very
as a
few
fan.
people have your experience and overview.
Exactly. So what is your take on 4v4? What's the future of this game mode? Because we've not seen a lot of this at all.
Well, I have 2 things I want to say about this. The first is I think 4v4 is the player's favorite format.
Gotcha.
I think everyone who plays 4v4 kind of has their moment when they play Clash, or they team up in Valorant and they group queue and they kind of realize like, wow, this is actually the way I'd rather play than solo queue because it's much more dynamic. And the game actually completely changes on the level that people want in TFT. People always talk about TFT like, I want to like go into the game not knowing what I want to do and kind of improvise and like learn all the different lines instead of just playing the same comp over and over because that's not what TFT is. I think 4v4 has so much to offer, and the depth that we're understanding about this format is continuing to evolve. I'm pretty sure that if TFT comes back a year later, we're gonna have different terminologies, different strategies, and I think we'll continue to evolve. I would say the equivalent of right now, if you're a League of Legends fan, is that we're all grouping down mid and running it down to S5 to try to push towers. I think that's exactly what we're doing right now, and we have so much more evolution because of how unexplored it is.
I had a heated conversation with Young Initialized where I said this tournament's never existed before. And he looked me in the eyes and said, there was these streamer cups. And I said, frankly, they don't matter. I mean it with the utmost respect. Community events, streamer events, sure. But on an arena, facing against clubs that are internationally renowned, multiple regions being represented, I think the scale of competition is surprised. I think your description of the Wolves players, some of the weakest individuals coming together, but as a unit, as a team, understanding makes the most sense. Do you see this being a format that's picked up by the wider market?
So that's the second thing I want to say, which is
that
I worry that by the nature of how 4v4 works, which is both your advantage as well as denying your opponent's advantage, puts TFT in a spot where it actually turns it to a little bit too toxic. I think there's a lot of griefing and inting that you could do that I worry that if you don't have friends, you have to enter the solo queue arena, you need to communicate through microphone because it's not efficient, and that creates a situation where I think the player base might turn on itself. Part of what I think makes TFT special is that we're hyper competitive, but we're very open and friendly. So many players willing to share their information, their knowledge, help each other improve. If it turns into sort of this cutthroat, toxic, like my teammates suck, I worry that what it does to the community.
What I think is, dare I say, your reservations, concerns are fair. However, you're not looking at a broad enough scope, because hypothetically, what if this became a queue? What if this became like Clash in League of Legends? Organized play, right? If you start adapting solo queue plays or solo queue lobbies to this, yes, I agree with you. I think it's very challenging. But if it were a separate queue, a separate game mode, a themed mode, something like that we've seen from, right in the past, that can make sense, right?
I can get behind that.
That's the way I do. Like, depending on how old you are, how much you played, ranked 5's ladder in League.
Man, so true.
Many people think of and love, right? So if you have a ranked 4's ladder, theoretically, then you have to play with 4 people you're on the same team on. Ideally, you should be on a friends list together. Pro tip to avoid it. I'll come back to this really quickly, but you set me up. Talking guides, sharing knowledge. The TFT community is very friendly. Who else does that? That could, maybe tell us. My producer,
do you know a guy? Do you know?
Let me read this teleprompter. Has his own web. Oh wait, actually, perfect.
Yeah, we're set up, man.
I was gonna say because there's actually this fantastic website that I started with the reigning world champion called TFT Academy. Me and Dish Soap about a few months ago kind of recognized that there's a lack of trust with some of these guides out there because they say, you know what, these are good guides, but who's really behind them and are they updated? We update every single day. We put out our own podcast breaking down the meta.
And you're putting your name on it as well.
Yeah. And we have a newsletter as well that we put out to help a lot of the people that support the website. So tftacademy.com is where you can find out all the latest things about the meta, updated tier list, podcast, newsletters, and more.
That is awesome. Look, I know you've been incredibly generous with your time. We've only got a few more minutes to speak.
Sure.
Can I ask very personally, how have you enjoyed EWC? I know with your broadcasting experience and background, I know you predominantly as the Hearthstone caster. That's how I know your voice from and where I'm aware. But what's your take on seeing the enemies? And more importantly, how do you feel knowing that you're sitting next to Fortnite on the same weekend as Street Fighter 6? Like, for me, as somebody that's been watching a lot of games for a long time, you also have had a similar experience. Yep. It's wild to me, but I love it.
It's wild. I frankly missed it. I think COVID took a lot from us, just not from as a society and an industry, but also on a personal enjoyment of what we do level.
Yeah.
And in the past, there were so many events that would bring us together from other communities. I have a lot of friends in the FGC, and I actually met some of them here in Street Fighter. I haven't seen them in 10 years. I haven't seen Reinhardt in like 9 to 10 years, and we caught up because we happened to get in the same shuttle.
He's such a cool
and he's the prodigal son he's a legend, and so that's the kind of stuff that I really missed about gaming. And nowadays, it's all about your own standalone temple events. Did you go to the Worlds of this? Did you go to the Invitational, the International of this? And if you do, you have to invite friends to come out from their own circles. But this forces us to blend together. That's one thing that I didn't realize I missed about the industry. I mean, how else are we supposed to interact?
Right.
You guys are going to always do your own things because we have separate spheres. And I think that's my favorite part about EWC so far.
I completely agree with that. I'm old enough and been watching long enough that when events were happening like the Esports World Cup, this is the ESWC, Electronic Sports World Cup from 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I forgot about that.
20 years ago, I don't think we've had multi-game tournaments that have existed and things like that. Let's quickly talk about the organization. Fnatic support Frodan. They believed in a streamer, a content creator. What was that integration like? And then, are you brave enough to tell us what's in the future?
Sure. I mean, the first thing was that I think it was really surprising how much they cared about performance over clouds. I kind of thought that they wanted me to be more of a marketing arm for the players because they're so individually talented. How much do they really want coaching? I mean, the reality is they need a lot of coaching, and so it was like a really good value add there. So I was very pleasantly surprised that Fnatic said, "Hey, look, you could try to make content around it, do like a vlog, do like the streams, like the scrim stuff, but we care more about performance over everything," and they've been immensely supportive about that. We had a boot camp in London. They have support staff here. They said anything we need, they got you. They gave me Fnatic clothes. This is a Fnatic shirt. You can't know. Oh wait, I still have the tag.
You still?
Actually, don't worry about that. I need a new shirt for today.
That's incredible.
I didn't pack
dressed up nice for us.
Did you tell we are live. Can you tell? This is unplanned and unscripted. That was fantastic.
It's been wonderful. And as for the future, they're not going anywhere. They really want to build around the team. I do think that we might have to reconstruct the roster if things weren't working, because, like we said, now that we understand 4v4 differently, we have to have players that are on the same page, and not necessarily just about individual accomplishments, but we don't know where to start, right? Because all these players are very valuable. Even the player that you would consider to be the, quote, weakest on paper end up doing the best on our team. So I think that's what they have to go back to the drawing board.
I just want to say, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I want to thank you for giving us such in-depth and fantastic answers. I also say one quick thing to Sam Matthews and Fnatic. 20 years. Congratulations. The organization has been around for 20 years. They just celebrated their double-decade birthday. I've been watching them since they were created. Man, I'm old. What I will say is, just before we let you go, what we do have is we've had this piece of EWC merch that we've had on the show all weekend. Everybody that's joined us has come to sign. It's actually getting really nicely populated. It was a great idea. Well done. What we will do is we'll ask you to sign this on your way out. Just before you do, could you say a message to your fans, to your viewers, to Fnatic, to anybody, to camera number one as a goodbye?
To my fans and the people that support me and Fnatic and the TFT community, this is literally all because of you guys. We are a community-first game, and I think it's going to always try to stay that way. So thank you so much for everyone who shows up, because without you, we have nothing. And
may the TFT community continue to have that same love the FGC community has, because it's the same thing. It's the same vibe. Frodan, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure speaking. Can we always just speak to people who have shoutcasting experience? We're going to go to a break. When we come back, we're going to to Blake and talking about the Fortnite playoffs and setting our preview.